I want to take you back to June 24th, 1995. Picture this. Ellis Park Stadium in Johannesburg, 65,000 people packed into the stands, and the entire nation of South Africa holding its breath. The Rugby World Cup final is about to begin, and what happens next will either unite a country or tear it apart forever. I'm standing here today to tell you about one of the most extraordinary examples of leadership and reconciliation in modern history. How Nelson Mandela used a rugby ball to heal a nation's wounds and transform enemies into countrymen. This isn't just a sports story. This is the story of how one man's vision turned what could have been South Africa's darkest hour into its most shining moment. But to understand the miracle of that day, we need to go back to where it all began, in a country where the color of your skin determined everything about your life. For 46 years, South Africa lived under apartheid, a system so brutal and comprehensive that it did not just separate races, it tried to crush the human spirit itself. I'm talking about a regime that forced millions of black South Africans from their homes, denied them basic human rights, and treated them as foreigners in their own land. Children were separated from their families. Husbands couldn't live with their wives. Dreams were systematically destroyed, generation after generation. And at the center of this white supremacist system was a sport that became its ultimate symbol: rugby. The Springboks, South Africa's national rugby team, weren't just athletes. They were the embodiment of Afrikaner pride and power. When they played for white South Africa. When they won, white South Africa celebrated. When they lost, black South Africans cheered. I remember reading about how black South Africans would actively support any team playing against the Springboks. New Zealand, Australia, England. It didn't matter who they were, as long as they were beating the green and gold. The Springboks represented everything that oppressed them, everything that told them they weren't good enough, weren't human enough, weren't worthy enough to be called South African. Then came February 11th, 1990. After 27 years behind bars, Nelson Mandela walked free from Victor Verster prison. I've watched that footage countless times, and every time I see this tall, dignified man emerging from those prison gates, I'm struck by something profound. There's no hatred in his eyes, no bitterness, just an unwavering determination to build something better. But here's what most people don't realize. When Mandela was released, South Africa was a powder keg waiting to explode. The white minority was terrified of retribution. The black majority was demanding justice after centuries of oppression. Violence was erupting across the country. Many predicted a civil war that would make Rwanda look tame. 4 years later, on May 10, 1994, Nelson Mandela became South Africa's first black president. And immediately, he faced a choice that would define not just his presidency, but the entire future of his country. The easy path was revenge, dismantling every symbol of white supremacy, including the Springboks. His own supporters expected it. They demanded it. You see, Mandela understood something that most leaders never grasp. True reconciliation doesn't come from destroying your enemy's symbols. It comes from transforming them into shared symbols of hope. And that's exactly what he set out to do with rugby. His security team was terrified. Here was a sport beloved by the very people who had oppressed the black majority, and now they wanted to celebrate it on the world's biggest stage? But Mandela had studied his opponents for decades. He spoke Afrikaans fluently, the language of his oppressors, because he knew that to change hearts, you must first understand them. He knew that rugby wasn't just a game to white South Africans, especially the Afrikaners. It was their identity, their pride, their connection to the land they loved. So instead of destroying that identity, he decided to expand it. As the World Cup approached, Mandela made a series of moves that seemed to defy all political logic. He met with Francois Pienaar, the Springboks captain, a young Afrikaner who represented everything his own supporters had fought against. But instead of confrontation, Mandela offered partnership. He told Pienaar that he believed in the team, that he would be supporting them, that they could unite the country. Imagine being François Pienaar in that moment. Here's the man you were taught to see as the enemy, the terrorist, the threat to everything you held dear. And he's telling you that he believes in you, that he sees you as a son of South Africa just as much as anyone else. It was revolutionary. But Mandela didn't stop there. He began attending Springboks training sessions, chatting with players, learning their names, asking about their families. He started wearing Springboks merchandise, speaking about rugby in his speeches, showing the black community that this team could be their team too. I can only imagine how difficult this must have been for many black South Africans. Here was their liberator, their hero, embracing the symbol of their oppression. Some felt betrayed. Some questioned his judgment. But Mandela was playing a longer game. He was betting everything on the power of sport to transcend the barriers that politics alone could never break. As the tournament progressed, something magical began to happen. The Springboks weren't just winning games, they were winning hearts. Black children who had never cared about rugby found themselves cheering for tries. But the real test came on June 24th, 1995, the day of the final against New Zealand's All Blacks, arguably the greatest rugby team in the world. As I mentioned at the beginning, Ellis Park Stadium was electric with tension and possibility. This was a nation seeing its future president not as the leader of Black South Africa or White South Africa, but as the leader of all South Africa. The game itself was a thriller. South Africa won 15-12 in extra time, with Joel Stransky's drop goal sealing victory in the most dramatic circumstances possible. Black and white, rich and poor, former enemies erupted in celebration. It felt like the birth of something new. It felt like hope made real. By embracing rugby instead of destroying it, he showed white South Africans that they had a place in the new South Africa. This gesture helped prevent the civil war that so many had predicted. It created space for the difficult conversations about truth and reconciliation that would follow. Most importantly, it established a model for how former enemies could become fellow citizens. What Mandela understood, and what many leaders still struggle with today, is that reconciliation isn't about forgetting the past or pretending injustices didn't happen. It's about creating a shared future where everyone has a stake in success. The 1995 Rugby World Cup didn't erase apartheid or solve all of South Africa's problems, but it proved that transformation was possible. The lessons from that day extend far beyond South Africa's borders. Around the world, we see societies divided by race, religion, politics, and history. We see leaders who prefer to exploit these divisions rather than heal them. We see communities that view each other's success as their own failure. But Mandela showed us a different way. He showed us that sometimes the most powerful political act is not to defeat your enemies, but to turn them into allies. He showed us that symbols can be transformed rather than destroyed. He showed us that sport, at its best, can reveal our common humanity in ways that nothing else can. Looking back now, nearly 3 decades later, it's easy to romanticize that moment. South Africa still faces enormous challenges: inequality, corruption, violence. The rainbow nation that Mandela envisioned remains a work in progress. But that doesn't diminish what happened in 1995. If anything, it makes it more remarkable. In a world that often seems more divided than ever, where leaders gain power by driving us apart rather than bringing us together, Nelson Mandela's example reminds us what true leadership looks like. It looks like courage, the courage to do what's right rather than what's popular. It looks like vision, the ability to see possibilities that others can't imagine. And it looks like love. Love for your people, all your people, even those who have wronged you. The 1995 Rugby World Cup was more than a sporting triumph. It was proof that even the deepest wounds can heal, even the most bitter enemies can become friends, and even the most divided societies can find unity. It was, in every sense of the word, a miracle. But perhaps the most beautiful part of this story is that it wasn't really a miracle at all. It was the result of one man's unwavering belief in the power of reconciliation, his willingness to take enormous personal and political risks for the greater good, and his understanding that sometimes the most radical act is simply to extend your hand to someone who has every reason to hate you. As we face our own divisions today, as we struggle with our own conflicts and prejudices, Nelson Mandela's example reminds us that change is possible. Unity is possible. Reconciliation is possible. But it requires leaders who are willing to be bigger than the moment, stronger than the hatred, and more committed to tomorrow's possibilities than yesterday's grievances. That's the lesson of June 24th, 1995. That's the gift Nelson Mandela gave not just to South Africa, but to the world. And that's why, nearly 30 years later, we're still talking about the day when rugby helped heal a nation and sport became the language of hope.